The truth did not arrive gently. It waited nearly 8 decades, buried beneath applause, studio lights, and the carefully preserved myth of eternal youth. At 80, Micky Dolenz stands at the edge of memory, looking back at a friendship that defined a generation, and quietly destroyed parts of him along the way. The world remembers the Monkees as laughter, harmony, and bright television smiles. But behind the music lived rivalry, abandonment, and a silence that grew heavier after death made answers impossible. Davy Jones was not just a bandmate. He was a mirror, a competitor, a brother, and eventually, a ghost that never stopped asking questions. As fame soared, cracks formed. Small at first, then impossible to ignore. What really happened when the cameras turned off? What words were never spoken before it was too late? And why did the truth wait until now? This is not a story about nostalgia. It is a reckoning. One man finally confronting the dark emotional cost of friendship, fame, and survival, long after the music faded. The story does not begin with applause. It begins with quiet rooms, with the soft hum of uncertainty, with a boy learning, far too early, that affection could disappear without warning. Long before Micky Dolenz became a face known to millions, he understood instability as a constant companion. Childhood moved in fragments, shaped by the entertainment world brushing close enough to promise magic, but never close enough to offer safety. Sets replaced playgrounds. Expectations replaced certainty. And somewhere in that shifting ground, Micky learned the most important survival skill of all: how to smile when the inside felt unsteady. Performance became armor. Laughter became language. Approval, once received, felt intoxicating, proof that he existed, that he mattered. Without it, a quiet fear crept in, whispering that love was conditional, fleeting, something that had to be earned again and again. The camera taught him how to stand, how to project confidence, how to hide doubt behind timing and charm. But the silence afterward always returned, heavier than before. When the Monkees came together, it felt like destiny disguised as coincidence. For young men assembled to play versions of themselves, unaware of how deeply those versions would begin to replace the truth. Davy Jones entered Micky's world like a sudden flash of light, polished, disciplined, adored almost instantly. Where Micky improvised, Davy refined. Where Micky searched inward, Davy projected outward. Their chemistry was undeniable, but so was the imbalance the world immediately recognized. Cameras lingered longer on Davy. Crowds screamed louder. Magazine covers chose favorites without asking how it felt to be compared daily to someone standing only inches away. Nothing cruel was ever spoken. That was the most damaging part. No confrontation, no release, just accumulation. Each performance added another unspoken measurement, another silent tally of who was winning an invisible contest neither of them had agreed to enter. Micky smiled wider. He leaned harder into humor, into voice, into being indispensable in ways that could not be quantified. Yet beneath the surface, a question began to form. Quiet, persistent, terrifying. What if the world stopped choosing him? Success arrived fast, overwhelming, merciless. The laughter was real. The friendship was real. But so was the fear of being replaced, overshadowed, forgotten. Behind studio lights and rehearsed spontaneity, pressure tightened its grip. The dream felt fragile, like glass stretched too thin. And still, no one spoke about it. Not Micky, not Davy. Silence became policy. Smiles became obligation. As the world leaned in closer, celebrating a phenomenon it barely understood, something delicate began to crack. Not loudly, not yet, just enough to be felt by the ones living inside it. And while fans saw harmony, something far more dangerous was growing beneath the surface. An emotional fracture forming quietly, waiting for the moment it could no longer be contained. Fame did not knock. It crashed through the door without warning, rearranging everything in its path. Overnight, the Monkees were no longer a project, they were a phenomenon. Schedules erased personal time. Applause replaced sleep. Identity blurred into obligation. For Micky Dolenz, success felt unreal, like standing inside a soundstage that never stopped rolling. For Davy Jones, it felt precise, structured, almost familiar, something he knew how to command. Side by side, they moved through a world that demanded constant performance. On screen, their bond appeared effortless, playful, unbreakable. Off-screen, silence grew heavier with every comparison the world made for them. Fans did not intend harm, but their devotion sharpened the divide. Davy became the heartthrob, the symbol. Micky became the energy, the sound, the balance. Labels settled in quietly, shaping perception before either man could resist them. Micky felt it most in the pauses, those moments backstage when laughter faded and the noise of the crowd bled through walls. He questioned his place not in the band, but in the story being told about it. Creativity felt boxed in by expectations. Humor became his shield again, deflecting questions he was afraid to ask out loud. Davy, meanwhile, carried his own weight, the pressure to remain perfect, disciplined, endlessly desirable. He understood structure, but structure did not soften loneliness. They spoke about music. They spoke about schedules. They spoke about everything except what mattered. No one taught them how to talk about insecurity when the world insisted they were living a dream. Each assumed the other was stronger, more certain, more satisfied. That assumption became a quiet barrier, turning shared experiences into parallel lives. On stage, harmony masked fracture. In interviews, rehearsed answers replaced truth. The band began to feel less like refuge and more like responsibility. Creative disagreements surfaced, small but telling. Control became a silent battlefield, over songs, over direction, over identity. Micky felt unseen. Davy felt cornered by expectation. Neither knew how to step outside the roles assigned to them without risking everything they had built. The irony was cruel. Surrounded by people, they had never been more isolated. Friendship existed, but it was cautious now, guarded. Affection survived, but it no longer felt safe to express vulnerability. Every unresolved feeling stacked upon the last, forming a wall made of politeness and professionalism. As cracks appeared within the group itself, the pressure intensified. Decisions were made above them. Futures were debated without their voices fully heard. And still silence held. The cost of speaking felt too high. What if honesty broke what success had built? By the time the unity of the Monkees began to visibly strain, the emotional distance between Micky and Davy was already vast. The question was no longer whether something was wrong, but whether it could still be fixed. And as the music continued, bright and relentless, the silence between them grew louder than the crowd, carrying consequences neither yet understood. When the noise finally softened, it did not bring relief. It brought exposure. The screams faded, the schedules loosened, and for the first time in years, silence had space to settle. For Micky Dolenz, the end of peak fame felt less like freedom and more like standing in the ruins of something unfinished. Applause had once dictated rhythm, purpose, identity. Without it, questions rushed in uninvited. Paths began to separate, not through anger, but through quiet drift. Reinvention became necessary for survival. Micky explored new creative avenues, directing, producing, chasing meaning beyond the image that had once defined him. There was relief in movement but also guilt, an unspoken feeling that moving forward meant leaving something behind. Davy Jones, meanwhile, remained closely tethered to the version of himself the world refused to let go of. The adoration never fully disappeared, but it narrowed, demanding repetition rather than growth. Distance grew in years, not miles. Occasional reunions carried warmth, nostalgia, and restraint. Conversations remained careful, polite, orbiting old memories without daring to examine them too closely. What once felt like rivalry had softened into something more complex. An ache mixed with affection, pride tangled with regret. Micky sensed the fragility of it, the way unresolved history hovered in every shared laugh. Then the call came, sudden, final. Davy Jones was gone. Time collapsed into fragments. Memory surged forward before grief could catch up. Images replayed out of sequence. Stages, studio lights, harmonies locked in time. Micky felt the weight of permanence settle in his chest, heavy and unmovable. Death did what life never had. It closed the door completely. Every conversation they postponed now belonged to silence. Every explanation left unspoken became a question without an answer. Grief arrived quietly, without spectacle. It lingered in empty moments, in familiar songs that now sounded altered, fragile. Micky replayed interactions with ruthless clarity, searching for signs he had missed, words he could have said differently. The past refused to stay still, pressed forward, demanding attention, demanding reckoning. The world mourned an icon. Fans celebrated a legacy. But privately, Micky mourned something more intimate, a relationship forever frozen in its unfinished state. There would be no resolution, no clearing of misunderstandings, no chance to admit fear, or gratitude, or regret. As tributes poured in and history began rewriting itself into something neat and consumable, Micky stood apart, holding a grief too complicated to explain. The applause had ended. What remained was the loneliest noise of all, the echo of unfinished truth, reverberating louder now than it ever had in the height of fame. Grief did not arrive as a single moment. It unfolded slowly, quietly, embedding itself into the ordinary spaces of life. For Micky Dolenz, loss did not scream. It whispered. It waited in familiar melodies playing unexpectedly on the radio. It lived in old footage that once felt joyful and now felt interrogative, as if the past itself were asking questions it had avoided for decades. Time, instead of healing, sharpened memory. Moments once dismissed as trivial returned with unbearable clarity. A glance held too long. A joke that masked discomfort. A conversation redirected just before it reached honesty. Micky found himself replaying those fragments repeatedly, not out of nostalgia, but obligation. Survival demanded understanding, and understanding required facing something he had spent a lifetime avoiding. The dark truth did not reveal itself as scandal or betrayal. It emerged as something far more painful: mutual emotional cowardice. Two young men, placed inside a machine designed to extract joy and marketability, had never been given permission to be fragile. Vulnerability felt dangerous. Pride felt necessary. Silence felt safer than honesty. And so they protected the image at the expense of the relationship. Micky began to recognize the weight of survivor's guilt, subtle but persistent. He had moved forward. He had adapted. He had found ways to redefine himself beyond the band. Davy, in contrast, had remained tethered to the version of himself the world refused to release. That imbalance, once ignored, now felt heavy with responsibility. Not blame, responsibility. The responsibility of being the one still alive, the one left to carry both sides of a story. Public memory simplified everything. Narratives flattened complexity into nostalgia. Interviews recycled laughter. Tributes polished rough edges until nothing sharp remained. But privately, Micky felt the cost of that simplification. The truth demanded space, and silence no longer provided relief. Age stripped away the need to maintain illusion. What once felt like protection now felt like erasure. He questioned himself relentlessly. Why hadn't he spoken sooner? Why had humor always replaced honesty? Why had success been allowed to dictate emotional distance? The answers offered no comfort. They only clarified the damage done by avoidance. The truth, once uncovered, refused to retreat, pressed forward, insistent, asking to be acknowledged. Revealing it felt dangerous, not because it would tarnish a legacy, but because it would complicate it. The world preferred heroes and harmony. The truth offered something messier. Two human beings shaped by pressure, comparison, and fear, loving and hurting each other in equal measure without ever fully understanding how to stop. Micky wrestled with the question of ownership. Was this truth his to tell? Or did telling it risk reopening wounds that had already settled into history? The weight of that decision lingered heavily. Silence had once been a shield. Now it felt like betrayal. In quiet moments, he imagined conversations that would never happen. Not confrontations, but admissions. Simple, devastating honesty. The kind that arrives too late to change outcomes, but not too late to change understanding. That realization carried its own grief, a softer, more enduring pain. As memory and guilt intertwined, one thing became clear: the truth would not stay buried. It lived in him now, demanding release. The only question left was whether sharing it would finally bring peace, or whether some truths, once spoken, echo forever, leaving wounds exposed to the light with no promise of closure. At 80, time no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like a lens, one that strips away urgency and leaves only what truly mattered. For Micky Dolenz, the years have softened the need to perform and sharpened the need to understand. The stages are fewer now, the crowds quieter, but the inner landscape has grown louder, clearer, more honest than it ever was in youth. Memory no longer arrives as accusation, comes as reflection. The laughter shared with Davy Jones still exists, intact and undeniable. The magic they created together survives beyond rivalry, beyond silence, beyond loss. But so does the truth of what was missing. Micky has learned that legacy is not built only on what the world remembers. It is shaped by what was never said, by what was carried alone. He no longer speaks of Davy as an icon. He speaks of him as a man, driven, vulnerable, proud, trapped by expectations he did not design. In understanding Davy's struggle, Micky finally understands his own. They were mirrors placed too close together, reflecting insecurities neither knew how to name. The darkness between them was not cruelty. It was fear. Fear of being lesser. Fear of losing love. Fear of stepping outside the image that fed them. Forgiveness arrives quietly, not as absolution but as acceptance. Micky forgives the younger version of himself who believed silence was strength. He forgives Davy for the distance that once felt personal and now feels inevitable. Most of all, he forgives the circumstances that shaped them, because holding on to blame only prolongs the echo. The truth, once revealed, does not undo the past. It reframes it. The joy does not disappear because pain existed alongside it. If anything, it becomes more profound. The music carries more weight now, more humanity. Each harmony feels like proof that something real lived there, even if it was imperfect. As the story reaches its quiet end, Micky understands that closure is a myth. Some relationships do not resolve, they transform. They become part of who remains. Davy Jones lives on not only in recordings and photographs, but in the emotional imprint left behind, permanent and instructive. The final reflection is not sorrowful. It is gentle. The music may have ended, but its resonance continues, altered by truth rather than diminished by it. What remains is not regret, but clarity. Not guilt, but responsibility to remember honestly, to speak carefully, to allow complexity to exist. And as the last notes fade, one understanding settles in with calm certainty. Some bonds do not need resolution to endure. They need acknowledgement. The truth has finally been spoken, not to reopen wounds, but to let the music rest, whole at last, in the place where memory and meaning quietly meet.